In your previous chemistry courses, you will have learned about a few different periodic trends. Largely, you took a qualitative approach to this understanding, and in our class, we're going to go a little bit deeper and look into some of the reasons that you actually see these periodic trends arise. On the board or on the screen, you see a few of those different periodic trends that we're going to talk about. And it's going to be important to review these concepts as we move forward in our class, namely electronegativity, atomic radius, or the size of an atom, the ionization energy, meaning the amount of energy required to remove an electron, and effective nuclear charge, which may be one of the periodic trends that you would kind of just skimmed over if you even learned about it at all in your previous chemistry courses. So generally, when we think about periodic trends, we're looking at the position of an element on the periodic table and some value or trend that we see based on an atom's location on this periodic trend. So for electronegativity, I'm sure that we all know that fluorine, oxygen, and nitrogen are three of some of the most electronegative atoms on the periodic table. And as you move further and further away from those three atoms, you get less and less electronegative. Okay, so then overall then, the trend for electronegativity is that as you go up and to the right, you increase in electronegativity. And oftentimes the noble gases are omitted from consideration because they already have a full valence shell of electrons. Another one of those periodic trends, and in fact one of the only ones that goes in the opposite direction, is actually going to be atomic radius, where we said that atomic radius actually increases as you go down and to the left. So the atomic radius is going to increase down towards francium, rubidium, things like that, as opposed to fluorine, which is actually going to be very small. And then effective nuclear charge also increases as you go from left to right on the periodic table. So we can think about, so this is nuclear charge. So we can think about some of the concepts that we're starting to review and see where this comes from. So let's take a look at something like atomic radius, for example. Well, one of the things that we know that impacts the atomic radius is going to be the location of an electron, the outermost electrons from the nucleus. So the nucleus is the center of an atom where all the protons and neutrons are, and then surrounding the nucleus are going to be your electrons. So at n equals 1, you're at the closest energy level to the nucleus. At n equals 2, you move a little bit further from the nucleus at n equals 2. And in addition, you're increasing the size of your orbitals. So at n equals 1, you have a small s orbital. At n equals 2, you have a little bit larger s orbital in addition to some of those p orbitals. But you're moving further and further away from the nucleus. Therefore, we might expect that as you go down on the periodic table, as you increase from n equals 1 to n equals 2 to n equals 3, etc., that because you're increasing your distance from your nucleus, that you then must subsequently be increasing your radius. Okay, so the radius is from the center to the outermost portion of the atom. In addition, as you go from right to left on the periodic table, you're increasing in radius, and this comes from the effective nuclear charge. So we can think about effective nuclear charge as, for example, if you have electrons on the outside of an atom and you have at the nucleus is where you find all of your protons. And remember that according to electrostatic attractions, we have a situation where positively charged particles are attracted to negatively charged particles. Okay, so protons are attracted to electrons. So because they have opposite charge, they're attracted to one another. Therefore, the effective nuclear charge, you can think of this as the impact of the attraction from the nucleus to the electrons. So therefore, the number of protons that you have basically determines how strongly that attraction is felt. And you can think of this as like a magnet. So if the center of an atom, the size of your magnet is determined by the number of protons that you have, then obviously as you go from right to left on the periodic table, you're decreasing the number of protons, and thus you are decreasing the size of your magnet. This means that your smaller magnet with less protons is unable to actually pull in those electrons from being attracted to the nucleus. Whereas if you went from left to right on the periodic table, you would increase your total number of protons and thus the size of your magnet. Because when we're on the same row, then we're at the same energy level. So let's assume that we're talking about carbon, for example. So if we looked at a carbon atom, you're in the n equals 2 state, and you have 4 electrons in this outer shell. Carbon has 4 valence electrons, and you also have 6 protons. So you have 6 protons here in the nucleus, and those 6 protons, because they're opposite charged to the electrons, are pulling in those electrons. Now, if we are talking about nitrogen instead, nitrogen has 5 valence electrons, but it also has 1 extra proton. So while we haven't done anything to the energy level that those electrons are located, we just place an extra one in there, we have increased the size of our nucleus because we've added a proton, and thus we've increased our magnet, which is going to pull in those electrons, which is the reason that nitrogen is actually a smaller atom than carbon is. Similarly, the ionization energy is also impacted by similar things like effective nuclear charge. So remember, at the center of an atom, you can find the nucleus and the protons and neutrons, which means that as we move further and further out from the nucleus, at, let's say, the n equals 3 state, we're looking at electrons that are further from the nucleus. And if we think of this as a magnet, which is pulling in those electrons, then an electron that's in this n equals 3 state is going to be easier to remove than an electron that is closer to the magnet at the center of the nucleus. And for this reason, that gives rise to the trend that the ionization energy actually decreases as you move further down the periodic table, because as you move down a row on the periodic table, you're moving to a higher energy level or a further distance from the nucleus. Now I'm going to bring up a set of problems, and I'd like you to pause the video and see if you can answer those independently before resuming the video to check out the explanations. When thinking about the atomic radius differences for these 3 elements, sodium, fluorine, and carbon, what immediately jumps out to me is the fact that the valence shell of orbitals for both fluorine and carbon are located within the n equals 2 principal quantum number. Whereas for sodium, I see that the valence shell, or outermost shell of electrons, is located in the n equals 3 shell. Recall that the nucleus at the center is surrounded by the different energy levels, or the discrete quantized energy levels at which we find electrons. And the further you go away from the nucleus corresponds to the higher number of n values, or integers, which tells us that the electrons for sodium are located in this outermost shell. Therefore, we would expect that the radius, which is the distance from the center to the outermost electrons, is going to be greatest for sodium. Notice, however, again, that fluorine and carbon are both located in the same valence shell. This means that we can't just use that information to determine which one is going to be largest or smallest, and instead we need to consider something else. Remember, I mentioned that the size of the nucleus is determined by, number 1, the number of protons that are located in the center of the atom. And with the increased number of protons, this effectively is like increasing the size of a magnet, which pulls in electrons from the outer shells. So therefore, the one that has the largest effective nuclear charge, or the largest magnet drawing in those electrons, is going to produce the smallest radius. And again, if we think about this as a magnet at the center, then we would expect that one that has a larger magnet is going to be able to draw in those electrons closer than a smaller magnet. And again, the size of your magnet is determined by the number of protons. And since fluorine is the 9th element on the periodic table, compared to carbon, which is the 6th, then fluorine has 9 protons, whereas carbon only has 6 protons. This means that even though all of their electrons are in the same shell, that shell is actually going to be pulled closer with fluorine because it has the larger effective nuclear charge. When considering which of boron, beryllium, and lithium are going to have the highest or lowest first ionization energy, it's important again to take an electron configuration approach. Notice on the screen in front of you all of the different electron configurations with their corresponding energy diagram I have provided for you. So for boron, we see a 1s2, 2s2, 2p1 electron configuration. And notice that in order to remove a single electron, we would take the highest energy electron, and it would be the the electron located in the 2p orbital. And by removing that electron, we actually end up with a scenario where all of the electrons are paired up, which we know is a stabilizing feature or something that causes the energy to be lower. Notice also then for beryllium that if we were to remove one electron, we would actually be removing the existence of a paired electron, an electron pair. And that's going to cause a destabilization or cause the overall energy of the beryllium atom to be increased. So this doesn't seem like a very favorable scenario to remove an electron. And then also for lithium, notice that if we were to remove an electron, like boron, this would cause the remaining electrons to all be paired up, which is a stabilizing feature. However, what's different about lithium versus boron is that if we were to remove one electron from lithium, we would in fact be removing the last electron from that valence shell, which would drop our valence shell to the 1s orbital. And we know, similar to the octet rule, that if you achieve noble gas configuration, then that tends to be a more stable or lower in energy system. So for that reason, the lithium atom is actually going to have the lowest ionization energy, which means that in order to remove this electron, it is the easiest because this would actually achieve a greater stability because you'd end up with a fully filled valence shell of electrons. Then what we're doing when comparing boron and beryllium, neither of which are going to achieve a full valence shell of electrons, what we do see though is that this stabilizing feature of removing this electron from the 2p orbital, leaving only paired electrons, is going to be much more favorable than creating a system where you actually make an unpaired electron. So because of that, boron is actually going to be lower in energy than beryllium. So therefore, the highest ionization energy, meaning the most energy required to remove an electron, is going to come from beryllium. That most recent example between boron, beryllium, and noticing that it kind of bucks the trend that you probably learned about previously, which stated that as you move from right to left on the periodic table, you get a lower ionization energy, is also true for something like oxygen, which is why it's important to actually consider the full electron configuration of atoms and ions when determining these periodic trends. Because while in general chemistry you probably learned just the simple rule that as you move from one side to the other on the periodic table, some of those trends start to fall apart when you get a little more nuanced. So let's take a look at oxygen as an example, which is one of those scenarios where it kind of goes against the trend that you would have learned about previously. When considering ionization energy, look at the full electron configuration for oxygen, 1s2, 2s2, 2p4. Notice that if we were to remove one of these electrons, what we would actually be doing is achieving Hund's rule of maximum multiplicity, which we've learned is a stabilizing or lowering an energy feature. So if we were to remove this electron from oxygen, then we would get all three of these electrons moving in the same direction, which again would be a lower in energy situation. So for that reason, oxygen actually has a lower ionization energy than something like nitrogen. So if you were to consider nitrogen, which has this electron configuration, now you see that if we were to remove an electron from nitrogen, this would be kind of destabilizing by removing that maximum multiplicity of having a fully populated energy shell with all the electrons going in the same direction. So again, it's important that the trends that you learned about, in previous chemistry courses are helpful in helping us understand and painting a big picture. However, in our class, it's important that we are able to dive in a little bit deeper to perhaps begin to explain some of those exceptions to the rules and the trends that you've learned about previously. It's not that your general chemistry and organic chemistry teachers were necessarily being dishonest when describing these things to you. It's just that we, as a chemistry community, we're trying to help paint broad strokes in describing the way that the world works. And in our class, something that's important to consider is we're going to start to dig a little bit deeper and start to explain things in ways that can't just be provided in a general trend.